Good day, everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about a very important concept, the circular economy, still a very timely concept. And I'm going to be talking about what it is not, and more to the point, what it should be and what it should not be. In 2019, BAN published a report that we entitled Holes in the Circular Economy, Leakage from Europe. That report was created and achieved by putting GPS tracking devices into electronics, old used electronics, and then deploying them in 10 different countries throughout Europe at municipal drop centers where consumers were supposed to take their electronics. And that report revealed high volumes of electronic waste still flowing out of Europe to developing countries, even in a continent where this was largely illegal and prohibited. The beauty of GPS tracking devices is that they are extremely accurate and they can show precisely where the pathway ends up for this electronics, right down to the facility, right down to the square meter of land where it sits. And one of the devices that we deployed in Germany, as an example, ended up in this location in Thailand. And it turns out there's hundreds of these locations in Thailand today, largely because China said no more. And as part of the early stages of the national sword policy, China forbid and actually started enforcing the import of electronic waste into China. And this facility, as you see, is very primitive. Here they were cracking open monitors, both flat screen and CRT monitors, exposing the workers. And the workers were Burmese, underpaid, illegal workers living in shacks that were built out of the cardboard boxes that the electronics arrived in. Nearby at another facility our trackers found, we saw another situation where workers here with these masks on and their fans are trying to prevent lead and tin solder vapors from being inhaled, but unfortunately they were inhaled, and they were pulling off the chips after melting these boards, and the boards that after the process was over, they were thrown into this smelter and burned basically, and the dioxin laden and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbon laden fumes poured out over the farmland. After a few weeks after we made our visit to Thailand, we were surprised that the government actually did some very high profile raids and shut down some of these facilities, some of these massive sprawling facilities calling themselves recyclers, bringing this material with a lot of pollution. Um, the debate ensued in Thailand of what to do, whether this was good for the economy, bad for the economy, what to do about this type of trade, which they were now engulfed in. And it's important to note that just 5 weeks ago, Thailand, after much hemming and hawing and saying they were going to ban it and then they weren't going to ban it, decided that they would indeed have a very comprehensive import ban on all manner of electronic waste coming into the country. That happened just on 5 October of this year. But unfortunately, this trade still goes on. And if the exporting countries don't take it seriously, don't pass the requisite legislation, like the United States has zero legislation against the export of electronic waste, if they don't do that and they don't enforce it, it's going to continue. This container, this picture was taken 4 days ago, and it was sent to us by Malaysian Customs. It's French e-waste that's been shredded up, put into a container arriving in Malaysia. So it's against that backdrop that I want to describe what happened a few months ago when I went to a conference in Europe before the pandemic about electronic waste, and a speaker there was from a law firm with his keynote speech about the circular economy. And he said, "This is the circular economy." And he showed a picture of a container ship. And I thought, wow, that's what you think is the circular economy? Uh, and then he showed another picture. This time it was a picture of the Basel Convention in action. And he said, and this is what stands in the way of the circular economy. I was gobsmacked. I was really shocked to hear this from a highly educated lawyer who saw the world in these simplistic terms, that the circular economy was about exporting waste to developing countries, and the obstacle was the regulation that the developing countries created over many years to try to control this type of dumping. So there are some serious misconceptions about the circular economy, and I want to dig into those just a bit here, because we want to use the circular economy. We want to make it the best circular economy, a true circular economy. And the first concept everyone has is largely correct as far as it goes, and that is we want to do something that's not linear. We want to not just take things out of the ground, make products, and dispose of them. Rather, we want to recycle them and reuse products as much as possible. So convert that mentality to take it, design it, to recycle it, hopefully, make that product. Then we're going to collect it, which is very challenging at times. And then we're going to recycle it, and then we're going to make it again. Sounds good. Sounds really good, right? But this simple concept alone is not going to do it for us. This is really the concept of recycling per se. And we know the circular economy really has to be more than that. But looking at the original diagram, it's very telling. And it tells us kind of the trouble we got ourselves into. This original diagram that was made for the MacArthur Foundation by Braungart and McDonough had three pillars to it, three principles. And everyone seems to focus in right away on the circles and arrows in the middle. And the circles and arrows in the middle are all about cycling and recycling. And they say optimize resource yields by circulating products, components, and materials. Absolutely. That's what recycling is all about. But what about that principle up there, up above? What is that principle number 1? And it talks about preserving and enhancing natural capital. Do you ever hear that much when people are talking about the circular economy anymore? I don't hear about it. And what is natural capital? It's saying nature has value. Clean air has value. What's the ozone layer worth? These are very strong economic principles and facts that have to be incorporated in anything we're dealing with in an economy. And what about that band down at the bottom, the third principle? What is it about? Revealing and designing out negative externalities. Whoa, how often do you hear about that as part of the circular economy? Minimize systematic leakage and negative externalities. When you do hear about it, people talk about it as if it's some kind of strange, extraneous thing that happens rarely, when in fact, it's really most of what happens with waste flows. Externalities are extremely common and have to be addressed head on. So the circular economy is more than just recycling on steroids. We hopefully know that. It's about designing things for product circularity. Design is so essential, and so often the word design is left out of the equation. It's also about designing for product longevity. It's about conserving resources and energy. It's about preserving that natural capital. It's about eliminating externalities. And it's also about eliminating human exploitation that comes from those externalities. And without those fundamentals, I would say the circular economy is bound to fail. It'll be more the same. So I want to focus in today on 3 of the biggest problems I see that we have to address if we're going to have a true circular economy and really live by it and really mean it. So the first one is what we already mentioned. You've got to look at principle number 1 and principle number 3 of the original diagram, the original concept, eliminating externalities and protecting natural capital. And we have to look at things a little differently. The circular economy seems to be far too focused on a systems and engineering approach, failing to take into account the economic and power inequities that drive a linear model, especially on the global stage. And finally, it remains far too focused on waste management after the fact, after the waste has already been produced, and not about waste prevention. We'll dig into these. So first, allowing externalities. Again, the history of pollution is one of cost externalization. And it can happen with air, it can happen with water pollution, or global dumping of waste. And what is it exactly? It's an economic concept. It's a market distortion. In other words, it's a false economics that occurs when an action taken damages others, damages nature or the global commons, resulting in a cost that is not paid by that actor that did the damage, either to prevent the damage in the first place or to compensate and mitigate for it. Basically, it's saying that the true cost that we all pay or that nature pays is greater than the market price. That's not good economics. And the way it's played out with waste management over history is very telling. First, we had a factory. They polluted, they threw their old waste out in the backyard and they burned it. People didn't like that, it smelled bad. So they put smokestacks up in the air and put it out higher up, but people downwind didn't like it. And so the factory said, okay, we'll just throw it into this water stream with a pipeline. We'll dump this waste into the river. No one will ever notice. And we can externalize it that way. And people did notice. Finally, the fishermen were very unhappy. So they ended up saying, let's put it in barrels and take it out on a ship and dump it out on the high seas and nobody will notice. But indeed, people did notice and it didn't work. It was all about finding ways to have others pay for the damage or have the earth pay for the damage. Now, the response over time was a response of cost internalization via regulation. So they said, no, you can't do that. You have to pay more to have things done right. And so they banned the dumping out in the backyard with public nuisance laws. They banned smokestacks that put out material without any type of pollution controls with Clean Air Acts. They banned the dumping in rivers, streams, and lakes with the Clean Water Act. And indeed, the London Convention banned the dumping at sea of industrial and radioactive waste. There was only one place left to go. And all of that internalization by the global north led to externalization of the global south, developing countries lacking regulations to internalize those costs. And that led to the waste trade, which in turn led to the Basel Convention. Today, a lot of it is playing out with e-waste and plastic waste. Those are probably the two primary types of waste trade, which are extremely problematic that we're dealing with today at the Basel Convention, for example. So in sum, pollution and labor abuse results from a linear path of greatest opportunity for cost externalization. Now, the second aspect I want to scratch the surface of is ignoring economics, true economics, macroeconomics. There are three drivers of these negative externalities I spoke of. There's the global common syndrome, where we don't have good laws governing what we do with our atmosphere, our oceans, etc. For example, the carbon pollution problem. Then we have a lack of democracy and empowerment to give people the right to redress damage to them. For example, toxic workplaces, labor abuse, environmental harm. When you have no democracy, you can't do much about that when you're the one that's disempowered and victimized. And finally, global inequity. Do you ever hear that talked about in terms of circular economy? Well, I would say this is the most powerful driver of all. It ensures labor cost disparity, providing cheap labor via trade, but with a lack of safety nets and protections in weaker economies. We are playing on a global uneven playing field. We are playing on a field that looks like this, perhaps. Looking at global inequity a little more closely, here's a map of global GDP per capita in US dollars. Now, the people that have the money are in the yellow, blue, and green areas. The people that are making that kind of gross domestic product per capita. And we notice that there really is indeed a band of inequity, a band of poverty. And it's very interesting to note this because our global trade follows a pattern of exploiting that. So we have trade going from the north into this band, or from Australia into this band to take advantage of cheap labor. Things move in and out of this band inordinately. We are trading far more than we need to just to take advantage of this global inequity that is out there. And indeed, this is what really harms a circular economy, prevents it from ever being truly circular. So it's not really this playing field, it's more like this playing field, far more likely, far more accurate of a depiction of the playing field we all live in. And problems we have due to this tilted global playing field of lack of equity in our wealth is that pollution havens are created, waste travels the world to find them, workers in poorer countries are more desperate and more willing to work in harmful jobs, disproportionate burden of toxicity and injury from waste management is borne by those in developing countries, which is an injustice. And recycling happens more often in dirty, inefficient, harmful operations. Unrecyclable residues are mismanaged. And disposal becomes artificially cheap. The circular economy is subverted. A linear economy is promoted. Finally, I want to look real quickly at ignoring waste prevention. What's wrong with this picture? Here you have some gentlemen in the classic analogy mopping up a problem of overflowing sink without turning off the tap. This is precisely the perfect analogy of what we're constantly doing and what the circular economy is still guilty of ignoring. We are ignoring waste prevention, which is the height of the waste management hierarchy. The waste management hierarchy tells us we need to take care of waste foremost by preventing them from being created in the first place. And we're not going to be able to recycle our way out of the waste crisis. And far too much, again, of our attention, despite the fact that the preferred approach is waste prevention, we don't put our resources commensurate with what is preferred. And indeed, the circular economy focuses mostly on reuse and recycling and not waste prevention. So again, we're ignoring the waste management hierarchy, and we seem to assume we can make and consume whatever products we want, no matter how stupid and unsustainable, how toxic or difficult to recycle they are. Then, after the damage is done, the circular economy can then be the mop, but by then I would say it's too late. Many products or materials should simply not be produced if we wish to have a healthy planet. For example, after life cycle analysis are found to be unsustainable when impacts are weighed and alternatives considered. These products might contain toxic, persistent chemicals. Thus, their circularity simply circulates toxic exposure. Or they cannot achieve practical circularity. Example, they are difficult or impossible to collect or recycle. I might want to add here the Internet of Things is a classic example of that. Has anybody thought about how we're going to collect that hardware out of clothing, out of furniture, out of walls, etc.? I don't think so. Waste prevention via design for the environment. First, we must decide not to produce toxic, unsustainable, unnecessary, and non-circular products. Second, for those products which should be produced, we must design them for long life. And finally, we must design all products for ease of collection and recycling. There have been some examples of misusing the circular economy to promote global dumping. I'm hoping my talk today will prevent more of these type of misguided approaches where we've had the Basel Convention citing the circular economy to promote a loophole that would consider anything that's e-waste as a non-waste if a claim is made by the exporter that it could be repairable. Very dangerous loophole being promoted by manufacturers today. Secondly, in the recast of the waste shipment regulation, we're hearing some stakeholders argue that the waste shipment regulation is outdated and should be in alignment with the circular economy by allowing more waste trade to developing countries. And most recently, in the plastics listings that were adopted at the Basel Convention, the US, Brazil, and Argentina, and the plastics industry all argued that controlling dirty and mixed plastic trade was counter to a circular economy. So in conclusion, if we really want a circular economy, then we must insist that the circular economy prioritizes turning off the tap and prevent the production of toxic, short-lived, and wasteful products. We have to make sure that all products should be designed for circularity. Before they are put on the market, they must prove a viable and safe pathway to long life, reuse, and perpetual material recovery. We must realize that loss of natural capital can be forever and has no place in a circular economy. We must realize that externalization of costs competes with and undermines a true circular economy. We must know that an uneven market playing field prevents a circular economy. We must be aware that global inequity is real and creates a powerful driver for exploitation via externalities. I thank you very much for your time, and I hope we have time for some questions.